Imagine this. You wake up tomorrow morning, and before you even fully start your day, something strange is already happening across the world. Fuel prices are rising in real time. Shipping companies are adjusting routes. Airlines are changing flight schedules. Stock markets are reacting with uncertainty. News channels are filled with urgent updates. But there is no world war, no global disaster, no single visible event that explains it clearly. Instead, everything seems to be connected to one extremely small point on the map. A narrow stretch of water, barely 40 kilometers wide, yet powerful enough to shake the entire global system. This is not fiction. This is not speculation. This is the reality of the Strait of Hormuz, and at the center of this global pressure point stands Iran. And what makes this even more serious is not just its location, but the speed at which its impact can spread across the modern world. Every single day, an enormous flow of energy moves through this narrow passage. Massive oil tankers, carrying millions of barrels, travel carefully through waters that are among the most strategically important in the world. This is not just another shipping route among thousands. This is one of the most critical energy choke points on Earth. Nearly 1/5 of global oil consumption passes through this single corridor. That means the fuel that powers transportation systems, industries, power plants, and entire economies is all indirectly dependent on this one route staying open. Most people never think about it, but the truth is simple. The modern world runs on systems that quietly depend on places like this. Now think about how fragile that really is. A system that large, that global, that complex, relying on a passage so narrow that it can be influenced by limited control. This is where geography becomes power. In open oceans, strength is measured by fleet size, distance, and global reach. But in narrow waterways like this, the rules change completely. Large naval forces lose flexibility. Movement becomes restricted. Visibility increases. And control shifts toward whoever understands the geography best. Iran understands this better than almost any other regional power. Over decades, it has developed a strategy that does not depend on competing directly with global superpowers in traditional warfare. Instead, it focuses on asymmetry, control, and strategic pressure. Fast attack boats that can move quickly and unpredictably in tight waters. Naval mines that can silently disrupt shipping lanes without immediate detection. Coastal missile systems positioned to monitor and target movement across the strait. And surveillance networks that continuously track activity in the region. In such an environment, even the most advanced military fleets in the world must operate carefully, because one mistake in a narrow space like this can escalate into a major international incident. But to understand why this situation exists, you cannot stop at military details or geography. You have to go deeper, because this is not just a modern geopolitical issue. It is the result of centuries of history, identity, and experience that have shaped how Iran sees the world today. Long before modern nations and borders, this region was known as Persia, home to one of the most powerful civilizations in human history. An empire that stretched across continents, connecting cultures, trade routes, and political systems in ways that were unmatched at the time. It was founded by Cyrus the Great, a ruler remembered not just for expansion, but for governance, administration, and the creation of systems that influenced later civilizations across the world. That historical legacy still plays a role today. It shapes national identity in a way that goes beyond politics. Iran does not view itself as a newly formed state reacting to modern pressures. It sees itself as a continuation of a much older civilization that has survived invasions, empires, and global transformations. That perspective changes everything about how it interprets power, pressure, and strategic positioning in regions like the Strait of Hormuz. As the world entered the modern era, Iran's position became increasingly tied to global energy politics. The discovery of oil in the region transformed everything. What was once a historically and geographically important area became a center of global economic interest. External powers became more involved, and with that involvement came competition, negotiation, and conflict. One of the most important turning points in modern Iranian history was the 1953 Iranian coup d'état. A democratically elected government was removed during a period of intense geopolitical tension, an event that left a deep and lasting impact on how Iran views foreign influence. It created a sense of distrust and caution that continues to influence political and strategic thinking even today. Following that period, Iran went through major internal transformation. The Iranian Revolution of 1979 completely changed the political structure of the country and its relationship with the rest of the world. Not long after, the nation was drawn into one of the most devastating conflicts in its modern history, the Iran-Iraq War, an 8-year war that caused massive destruction, economic strain, and significant loss of life. These events did more than change borders or governments. They shaped a national mindset centered around resilience, survival, and strategic independence. They reinforced the idea that Iran must always prepare for pressure from outside forces, and that control over critical geographic points is essential for long-term security. And this is where everything connects back to the Strait of Hormuz. Because when geography, history, and strategy come together, certain locations become far more important than their size would suggest. The strait is one of those locations. It is not just a body of water. It is a strategic leverage point, a place where control over movement translates into influence over global systems. Even the perception of instability here is enough to affect global markets. Oil prices react quickly to tensions. Investors adjust expectations. Governments monitor developments closely, because the modern global economy is not only built on physical infrastructure, but also on confidence, predictability, and uninterrupted flow. If this waterway were ever disrupted, even temporarily, the effects would be immediate. Oil prices would spike rapidly. Transportation costs would increase across industries. Airlines would face rising fuel expenses. Shipping routes would become longer and more expensive. Supply chains would slow down, affecting everything from manufacturing to retail. And gradually, those effects would reach everyday life, influencing the price of goods, services, and basic necessities. Countries that depend heavily on imported energy would feel the impact first. Major economies across Asia, including large industrial powers, rely significantly on oil and gas transported through this region. A disruption would force them to quickly search for alternative sources, often at higher costs and with limited availability. But the effects would not stop there. In a globalized economy, shocks travel quickly. Financial markets react instantly. Trade slows. Economic growth is affected across multiple regions. This is why the Strait of Hormuz is considered one of the most critical strategic points on Earth. It is not just about regional control. It is about global stability. And that is why military presence in the region is constant, surveillance is continuous, and diplomatic efforts are ongoing. Multiple global powers have an interest in ensuring that this passage remains open and secure. But even with all this attention, the situation remains inherently unstable because the underlying conditions never fully disappear. Political tensions rise and fall. Regional alliances shift. Strategic calculations evolve. Each event adds another layer of complexity to an already sensitive environment. At the same time, Iran's position in this system is not purely defensive or reactive. It is strategic. The ability to influence or disrupt this passage, even indirectly, creates a form of leverage that extends far beyond its immediate geography. It becomes a tool in negotiations, a factor in global decision-making, and a constant point of consideration for other nations. And this brings us to an important realization. Most people think of global power in terms of large armies, advanced technology, or economic size. But in reality, some of the most influential points in the world are extremely small geographically, yet enormous in impact. The Strait of Hormuz is one of those points. A narrow corridor that quietly supports a massive global system. We live in a world where interconnected systems define everyday life. The price of fuel, the cost of transportation, the availability of goods, and the stability of economies are all tied to global networks that most people never see. And within those networks, certain locations act as critical pressure points. When they remain stable, the system functions smoothly. When they're threatened, the effects spread quickly. The Strait of Hormuz is one of those pressure points, and Iran, with its geography, its history, and its strategic thinking, remains at the center of its importance. This is not a simple story of conflict or control. It is a complex interaction between geography, history, economics, and power. The real question is not whether this place matters, because its importance is undeniable. The real question is how long this delicate balance can continue to hold, and what the world would look like if it ever breaks. Because in a system this interconnected, it does not take a global war to create global consequences. Sometimes, all it takes is one narrow stretch of water, and the moment when everything changes.